So, Colm Kelleher just said that cattle mutilations are caused by aliens and humans. This is insane. What is going on? Get in here. This is Jack with Cosmic Road. I talk about UFOs and the paranormal. Please hit like, please subscribe, and share on social media as I'm going through the story. Okay, now Linda Moulton Howe has covered alien cattle mutilations forever, and I say alien cattle mutilations, but I just mean cattle mutilations because we don't know what the cause is. It is a truly anomalous phenomenon because there are a lot of UFOs associated with these events. People will find these bloodless cows that animals, predators will not touch. Where weird pieces of the animals are missing, parts of the faces are removed, eyeballs, other parts of the body, and there's a lot of UFOs in connection to these events. But human artifacts have been found as well, like a hypodermic needle under one of the cattle carcasses. The cattle mutilation phenomenon has always intrigued me and confused me and perplexed me, as so much of the broader phenomenon does, because it is so baffling and there's evidence that goes both ways. You know, on the one hand, if it were humans doing it, if it were, regular citizens or foreign citizens even doing it, they would have been caught, right? Because this has been going on for decades. Tens of thousands of these animals have been killed. So surely that level of activity would have been noticed at some point, and those perpetrators would have been apprehended. But there has never been a single arrest associated with these killings and mutilations. So clearly something non-mundane is going on, even if it's just, black ops doing something secretive and weird. However, with all the UFO connections, it truly does seem like there is more of an alien or otherworldly cause. Now, Colm Kelleher, on the recent episode of Weaponized with George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell, and I think this podcast, it's already gangbusters, but I think this podcast is going down in legend as one of the best on the subject. I love Colm Kelleher. He has been around this business for a while. He has, worked with NIDS and OSAP. He helped write the book, The Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, with George Knapp. He also helped write the book about Skinwalker Ranch, The Hunt for the Skinwalker. I'm always fascinated by anything he has to say on one of these subjects. So let's hear what he has to say about cattle mutilations. Here goes.
Here we have a phenomenon that began, we think, in the 1950s. It probably began earlier. But, a lot of the cases started emerging in the late 1950s and 1960s of cattle mutilations all the way through the western part of the United States and also up in Canada, and actually in other countries too. So here we have a phenomenon that's quote-unquote genuine. But at the same time, we're finding these occasional cases where it's pretty obvious that somebody is using sedatives, is using hypodermic needles, and is using medical equipment to exsanguinate animals. So we postulated that there were two things going on simultaneously that were causing a lot of confusion. You've got, number one, a quote-unquote genuine phenomenon, and number two, you've got this medical surveillance project that is being carried out knowing that, most veterinarians will not touch a mutilated animal because the quote-unquote aliens are associated with mutilated animals. So these small covert surveillance programs that are being carried out are being carried out knowing that the overall umbrella of cattle mutilations is protecting the perpetrators from being caught. So, that's the bidirectional mimicry. You've got the quote-unquote real phenomenon. You've got a small program that's hiding underneath the phenomenon, and then you've got the phenomenon that's actually mimicking, the government surveillance program. So you've got this, you can create these Z plots, but the problem is that you're looking at cattle mutilations through the lens of two layers of deception. So you've got the layer of deception from the phenomenon. And you've also got the layer of deception from the government program that is using cattle mutilations as a cover for a surveillance effort. So you've got two layers of deception. It's very, very difficult for an outsider coming into this to penetrate those two layers of deception. You can draw exactly the same plot for the UFO phenomenon. The UFO phenomenon starts off as being genuine. Then we interviewed Colonel Barry Hennessy, who was the head of the infamous AFOSI PJ. We interviewed him as part of the OSOP program. He blatantly told us, he didn't tell us on camera, but he told us that they had used the UFO phenomenon as a cover for their advanced projects. And this guy was part of the Air Force, the AFOSI. So we have the same thing. We've got a quote unquote genuine phenomenon. We've got a series of advanced technology projects, special access program going on using the UFO as a cover. And then you've got this sort of reverse engineering setup that's going on that are creating these, special access programs that are happening. And then you've got the phenomenon that is mimicking these special access programs. You've got helicopters with impossible levels of acceleration. You've got, craft flying around the place that look like triangular craft that should be part of the Air Force arsenal, but they're probably the phenomenon. So you've got this two layers of deception with the UFO phenomenon. So the question is, which we've been asking for decades, are they ours or theirs?
Fascinating, right? So Colm Kelleher is saying that there are humans performing cattle mutilations from the government, some sort of black ops sort of thing, as well as genuine, anomalous, more otherworldly cattle mutilations going on. So let's think about that for just a second. What other cases can we think of that are similar? Well, the very first alien visitations that we can, that we know about in our quasi-modern era, at least since the advent of the United States of America. I'm thinking of the airships in the late 1800s. Well, people at the time were familiar with balloon technology. That was a new thing. I'm sure balloononauts were, like the astronauts of the time. The phenomenon started to represent itself in those terms, but much more fantastic. People would see these amazing otherworldly, fantasy airships, these crazy, fantasy zeppelins. And they would, sit down, and the occupants coming out looking human would ask for a cup of flour or whatnot. Just some excuse to interact with humans, at least that's my guess. A few decades later, when people are familiar with airplanes, they start showing up as nuts and bolts craft, or seemingly nuts and bolts craft. And there are, of course, anomalous objects sprinkled throughout that. But when you look at like the George Adamski footage, which I believe is legitimate, it looks like a very nuts and bolts object. It doesn't look like the craziest stuff that is out there. And, maybe that's by design. Maybe it's trying to mimic the airplanes that people are familiar with, but making it in a fantastic shape and doing fantastic things, much like the fantasy zeppelins of the late 1800s, the fantasy airships that people were seeing. Similarly, a few decades later, we have the crop circles, which began as a hoax perpetrated by two Englishmen, two pranksters who were really good at math. And, it was inspired by legitimate burned circles in the ground and in the crops left by UFOs. But the crop circles that we're familiar with these fantastic shapes were originally perpetrated by these two hoaxers, and other hoaxers joined in. Well, guess who else joined in? The beings joined in. That's right, many crop circles, according to my research, are genuine anomalous crop circles. There are weird electromagnetic signatures associated with them and even genetic differences in the crops themselves. What does that mean? Well, I have no idea. Of course, I'm not an alien performing a crop circle, but it definitely seems like the phenomenon is trying to interact with us using things that we're familiar with. Right? It does balloons, it does nuts and bolts flying objects, it does crop circles. Well, could it do cattle mutilations? Is that a thing? Is that possible? Because that's not something that was, really in the public zeitgeist as much as airplanes or balloons. Was it in the public zeitgeist as much as crop circles? I would argue not, that it was more fringy even back then. But it's possible. It's possible that it had entered the public consciousness. Maybe the government was starting to do something. Colm Kelleher does say that it's a minority of cases, a relatively small number that appear to be human cattle mutilations. And which argues to me that the phenomenon probably began this the series of events, the cattle mutilations. So I don't think that the phenomenon is trying to fit into an existing pattern, but I could be wrong. But it is really interesting, nevertheless, to consider that humans may have begun this phenomenon of cattle mutilations to check on, as Colm Kelleher says, the toxins in the blood of the cows in fear that those toxins may be passed on to humans. And, that could well be the reason why humans would be performing this, and that the phenomenon, the alien or otherworldly phenomenon, saw this and thought it would try to squeeze in on the fun so as to interact with humans in the way that it has always done. And I say always, but within the last 100 or 200 years. And although I'm sure it's done similar things forever, I think that some aspects of the phenomenon have been here as long as humans have, and potentially much, much longer. But if your research leads you to believe something else, I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well. What else could it mean that there are two sets of cattle mutilations? If the otherworldly phenomenon did not start the cattle mutilation phenomenon, if it was humans, that could fit the pattern that I've suggested. However, what if it was flipped? What if the phenomenon, the otherworldly phenomenon, started doing this? Which is what I think is the case, because according to Colm Kelleher, the human cattle mutilations are, a small minority of the cases. So that would indicate that the bulk of this is alien, and thus probably begun by them. I would hazard a guess. So why would the beings do it? Well, there's many theories about why they would do it, and I've discussed some of them on the channel before. But why would humans imitate the phenomenon instead of the phenomenon imitating humans, or mimicking some pattern of human behavior as it seems to do in the past? Why would it be reversed? Well, maybe humans are trying to figure out what the beings are doing, and so they mutilate cows. They go and kill and harvest the cows to analyze them to see what it is the aliens might be studying. And there is a precedent for that with the MILABs. The MILABs are the military abductions of individuals, which mimic in many ways alien abductions, even with a lot of the same technology, but with a very different focus. The beings abduct people for hybridization and whatever programs they do. And the military will target contactees and abductees of the aliens, they will abduct those same people and interrogate them about what the aliens are doing. They want to know what the beings are up to, which is fascinating, especially if Eisenhower made a treaty with the beings to allow abductions. Why then would the military want to abduct those people? You know, if they have a deal, you would think that they would know, especially since, according to like the Terry Lovelace case and many other cases, the military and the government is working with the beings. However, there is a school of thought that some beings are outside the scope of the treaty and they are abducting people on their own. Anyway, all of that is outside the scope of this video, but it does touch on some of some similar points. In other words, could the government be trying to figure out what the aliens are doing by, reverse engineering the cattle mutilation phenomenon? Just a thought. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your insight on all of this because, this is above my pay grade, I'll be honest. So let me know your thoughts. Give this video a big thumbs up. I would sure appreciate it. Please hit this, the subscribe button if I can get the word out, and the bell to be notified of future videos. You don't want to miss a thing. Please follow me on social media. There's Facebook and Twitter links below in the description. I would love to see you there. Until next time, this is Jack with Cosmic Road, signing out.